Reuchlin had every reason to fear for his future, but in one thing he was deeply mistaken. His recommendation was not seen by Pfefferkorn and his allies as a noble but useless act of resistance. No, it landed like a thunderclap. Pfefferkorn, after reading just a few paragraphs, began tearing his hair out. What were they supposed to do now? This wasn't some obscure priest scribing in the margins. This was one of the leading lawyers of the empire, a pioneer of Christian Hebrew studies, a founding figure of German humanism, and a man personally known to the emperor. The plan had been for a unanimous condemnation of Jewish books. Now the emperor was hesitating, and the whole campaign, years of effort, stood on the edge of collapse. Reuchlin caused a disaster, but Inquisitor Hochstraten calmly explained to his comrades that there was the bright side as well. In the end, Reuchlin was the only one to show himself so stubborn. The emperor was still thinking, that's true, but he hasn't made a final move. The campaign was paused to await a final decision. Now Reuchlin stands in its way. Then all they had to do was remove Reuchlin, and the decision will be in their favor. Thus, massive attack on Reuchlin began. Gregor Reich, prior of Freiburg, a respected scholar and more recently the emperor's personal confessor, publicly condemned Reuchlin's recommendations, calling them scandalous and urging the immediate resumption of book confiscations. Pfefferkorn, of course, started his own offensive. In the spring of 1511, just in time for the Frankfurt Book Fair, he published The Hand Mirror, his first pamphlet directed against Reuchlin. In The Hand Mirror, Pfefferkorn outdid himself. He mocked Reuchlin's arguments with anger and fury. He declared that Reuchlin understood Hebrew as well as an ass is climbing a stairway. Finally, he claimed Reuchlin hadn't even written his recommendations. They had, he said, been ghostwritten by his Jewish sponsors, while the doctor of imperial law was nothing but a puppet. Back in Cologne, the center of the campaign, with Hochstraten conducting things, another voice joined, the well-regarded professor of theology Arnold of Tongern. He found Reuchlin's recommendations not only impermissibly favorable to the Jews, but outright dishonest. He accused Reuchlin of misinterpreting the Bible, of showing lack of respect for the church, of twisting the law, and so on. But the truly horrifying part, the professor insisted, was that these manipulations, whether made deliberately, through dangerous error, or, heaven forbid, for personal gain, had all been deployed in defense of the enemies of mankind, the Jews. Those very Jews who poison wells and murder Christian infants in ritual blood rites to satisfy their cannibalistic traditions. Reading those lines again, because he couldn't believe them at first, Jonathan Kostheim, representative of the Frankfurt Jewish community, sat frozen in silent horror, gripping his head. Yes, these were sadly familiar accusations. Arnold from Tongern had said nothing new. Such blood libels had often led in the history of Christian Europe to pogroms and expulsions, but to see this vile, barbaric myth openly repeated, not by a street preacher, not in some anonymous tract, but by a respected professor of theology, representing the faculty of one of the empire's great universities, that was unthinkable. It was a mockery of academic integrity, a violation of even the most basic standards of decency. But what Jonathan had not yet realized, or perhaps refused to accept, was this: there were no standards anymore. There was no decency left. Obscurantism, forced for decades to tolerate humanism, languages, Latin-scribing scholars, finally raised its head. It spread its wings and declared, everything now is allowed. It is allowed to hate, allowed to burn, allowed to summon the mob once more for executions, for blood. Preachers, one confined to the back of the pulpit, now marched at the front, armed with pamphlets and gossip. Universities marched along. Cologne led the way, but soon came Erfurt, Mainz, Leuven, and Paris. At the Sorbonne, they met 47 times, 80 learned men, and after this thorough examination, declared the Jewish books, as well as the Reuchlin's texts in defense of them, must be burned. The obscurantists didn't just return, they kicked in the door, tore down the curtain, took the front row, and began dictating the script. In short, the stage was set. All that was missing was the final element, a penitent sinner begging Holy Mother Church for forgiveness. On behalf of the Faculty of Theology at the University of Cologne, wrote Hochstraten to Reuchlin, "We demand, Professor, that you immediately withdraw your so-called recommendations and publicly affirm that the judgment passed on your writings by Professor Arnold of Tongern and the Cologne University is entirely correct. And, as is customary in any self-respecting inquisition, where there is a bad cop, there must be also a good one." So, along with that demand came a second letter. This one was from Reuchlin's old friend Konrad Kolln, also a professor in Cologne. It was a textbook example of the timeless genre. "My friend, you know how it is these days. Just go with it. Don't be so stubborn." In a soft, familiar tone, Kolln urged Reuchlin to step back from his statements. "Public opinion," he explained, "has firmly concluded that your views are unacceptable. But listen, old friend, you're not even a theologian. Just say you made a mistake, misread something, got confused. A mistake, after all, can be forgiven. Heresy cannot. I believe that if you now clearly state that you strongly disagree with your earlier self, you'll be forgiven. But I beg you, my dear friend, act quickly. You have no cards, and your situation is becoming dangerous. Rumors are spreading all over the Rhine. People are saying you approved of the Jews crucifying Christ. They claim you said they were simply following imperial and canon laws. Hurry, old friend, or else." Kolln didn't finish the sentence, but his letter smelled unmistakably of ash and sulfur. Reuchlin sat once again at the same table by the window in his Stuttgart home. How life had changed in just a few short years. To find oneself at the center of a scandal, targeted with threats, mocked, accused of heresy, and even of selling out Christ, was hardly a recipe for a long and peaceful sunset. Anyone else might have broken under the pressure, but Reuchlin, philologist, humanist, scholar, had discovered by 60 a spine of iron. And more than that, he had done something in his life. He knew he was not alone. Because across the Holy Roman Empire, and indeed all of Europe, countless humanists considered Reuchlin, quite rightly, their mentor. Res publica literarum, the invisible, scattered republic of letters, with a living network of poets, historians, philologists, scientists, translators, lawyers, diplomats, writers, philosophers, and theologians. It had no armies, that's true, but it had letters and manuscripts, libraries and pamphlets. It had students and publishers, contacts and influence. The Renaissance may feel immense when you first walk beneath its dome, but once you're inside, you realize it was one large Renaissance village. Nearly every European humanist was connected by some thread, visible or not, to every other. And now, 1,000 threads stretched to Stuttgart, to Johannes Reuchlin. From Marsilio Ficino in Florence to Aldus Manutius in Venice. From Sebastian Brandt in Basel to Willibald Pirkheimer in Nuremberg. From Ulrich Zwingli in Zurich to Jacques Lefebvre d'Etaples in Paris. And Reuchlin felt it. That quiet, powerful connection to something larger than himself. And so, far from breaking him, the attacks and accusations of the obscurantists had only made his anger grow stronger. They had expected Reuchlin to repent and retreat. Reuchlin had decided to strike back. In March of 1513, just in time for the spring Frankfurt Book Fair, Reuchlin published one of the boldest polemical texts of the early 16th century, a defense of Johannes Reuchlin against the Cologne calumniators. It was sharp and fearless. "The professors of Cologne," he wrote, "are not true theologians who should be trusted. These men are unworthy of the great and precious name of theology, for they are not theologians but appear as the vilest scoundrels, wickedest babblers and low-life slanderers. I know my enemies have been vexed because I said that Jews are our fellow citizens. Now I want them to rage even more in anger, and I hope their guts burst because I am saying that the Jews are our brothers. Brothers of Arnold, brothers of all the Cologne theologists, not only because we have one Father, the Creator of all things in heaven, but also because they were created with us on earth by the same Father. Although not of our limb, they are nonetheless brothers with us. Yes, I am the favor of the Jews, as I must be, as is appropriate, as St. Paul, as St. Jerome, as St. Thomas Aquinas, as the popes, as the emperors, as all the learned and Christian jurists, not in opposition to the Church, but for the Church, because I have acted for justice and to the advantage of the Church. I am a favorer of the Jews, because I justly prevent perverse and harmful men from doing evil and intolerable things." It was a slap in the face to the obscurantists' party. They had expected Reuchlin to break, but now the war was public, and it belonged to all of Europe. It had been nearly 4 years already since that fateful day in August 1509 when Pfefferkorn first stood before the emperor. But what no one knew now in March 1513 was that this war was only beginning. Still ahead, the burning of Reuchlin's book in Cologne, a dramatic trial in Speyer where he would triumph, and Hochstraten ordered to pay 111 guilders in court costs, an appeal, a Vatican commission, political intrigue at the highest levels, 2 emperors, 2 popes, 2 kings that will try to intervene. All in all, a decade of struggle that would outlive its earliest participants. In short, what lay ahead was a long narrative thread, one that could only be fully described in an entire book, such as Johannes Reuchlin and the Campaign to Destroy Jewish Books by David Price, or Johannes Reuchlin, a Theological Biography by Franz Posset, without which I certainly wouldn't have been able to tell you this story today. At that moment, what lay ahead was uncertainty and many long years of struggle, and yet I'm convinced that the victory, the true historical victory in the conflict with Pfefferkorn, was won by Reuchlin precisely now, in March of 1513. Because here's the thing, with his defense against the Cologne calumniators, the previously cautious doctor of imperial law shifted the entire public discussion onto a new track. He took the debate beyond theological, religious, and legal arguments and turned it into a public discourse on freedom of speech and freedom of conscience. And if up until that point the conversation had been about Jewish books alone, and indeed across the whole empire there was not a single other Christian scholar besides Reuchlin who was willing to defend them at the cost of his own life and reputation, then now this had become a debate about the right to doubt, about academic integrity, and even about the future of Europe. It was a clash between the old world, the world of scholastic dogmatism, and the new world, the world of humanist thought. Reuchlin was now defending not only the books, not only Jewish communities, not only himself, no, he was defending the very future of the Renaissance in Europe, the honor and hopes of the entire humanist tradition, this invisible republic of thinkers, which he knew would not leave him alone in this struggle. And the Republic of Humanists did come to his aid. Soon, a slender anonymous book appeared in print. What was it? An epistolary novel? A collection of real historical documents, or perhaps just someone's nasty joke? You couldn't really tell at first glance. This was The Letters of Obscure Men, one of the most astonishing works of the Renaissance. Some books welcome you like an old friend. You step inside effortlessly, as if the author wrote them just for you. Others stand locked, like grand old mansions with closed doors and dusty portraits on the walls. The Letters of Obscure Men, a satirical text from 1515, belongs firmly to the second kind. It's the perfect example of what one might call a crusted book, rigid and difficult to enter, but believe me, so rewarding if you choose to stay. Yes, the central conflict of the Letters of Obscure Men is timeless, the desperate resistance of the past trying to block the future from arriving. You'll find it just as relevant in the 1500s as today. But that universal story is hidden deep beneath the layers of the early 16th century. The letters throw the reader straight into the chaos of the Reuchlin affair and shower them with a flood of names, details, petty insults and inside jokes, half of which were already obscure a few years after publication, let alone 500 years later. It's a literary variation of an onion, and peeling it will make you cry. At first is the helpless kind of crying, the "what am I even reading" kind. But slowly, as you put the context together, the tears shift into something else. First, laughter, then, oddly, gratitude. You already know most of what you need to understand the letters from the previous parts of this episode. But let's add a couple more brushstrokes to the canvas. A year before the letters came out, Johannes Reuchlin had published another defense, this time a polished volume of 100 letters he'd received over the years from fellow humanists, professors, bishops, writers, diplomats, physicians, and theologians. The book was called Letters of Illustrious Man, and it was basically a public statement: this is who I am, and these are the people who stand with me. So when a group of Reuchlin's supporters decided to write something in his defense, they flipped the whole idea on its head. That's how we got the Letters of Obscure Men, a grotesque, razor-sharp parody passed off as a real bundle of letters supposedly written by Cologne's theologians, pompous, petty, and utterly ridiculous, trying to denounce Reuchlin and get him condemned. The humanists did a great job. In the Letters of Obscure Men, they mimicked the voices of Reuchlin's opponents so precisely that, at first, some of them actually believed it was real, a genuine collection of letters from anti-Reuchlin theologians. Only after a close read did they realize they had been made to look like clowns. What unfolds in the letters is a full parade of self-important fools, convinced that they are completely right. High-minded moralism collides with beer-hall vulgarity, lofty Latin with everyday nonsense. Scripture is quoted next to toilet humor. Redundancy piles on redundancy, and behind the false appearance of order, there's glorious chaos, carefully constructed. That, of course, was the whole point. The humanists wanted to show just how absurd the logic of Reuchlin's enemies is, and how their seriousness taken to its extreme turns into farce. At one point, the authors of the letters seriously debate what to do if, God forbid, with no malicious intent, of course, you accidentally bow to a Jew in the street, mistaking him for a respectable magister. Is that a moral sin? And that's hardly the only theological dilemma they wrestle with. These thinkers are constantly immersed in lofty debates. Is St. Thomas holier than St. Dominic? Or St. Dominic holier than St. Thomas? Or are they equally holy? And the eternal question, of course, does a circumcised Jew miraculously regrow his foreskin upon baptism? The authors of these letters are hypocrites and moral disasters. They throw parties that would make Bacchus blush. They pine for the good old days when reading Virgil could earn you a burning at the stake. Back then, they complain, things were better. Now, everyone's obsessed with learning godless languages and attending reading of these damned poets, while theology faculties sit empty and no one cares about proper scholasticism anymore. They're also deeply ignorant and painfully talentless, yet utterly convinced of their brilliance and literary taste. One scoffs at Greek Homer, insisting that the real Homer, the correct Homer, is the Latin one. That Greek guy? Probably a fraud. And then there's poetry. Terrible verses, clumsily metered and grotesquely phrased, happily exchanged in letters like sacred relics. Dr. Reuchlin to wit, Augenspiegel horrit, whom Arnold of Tongern Magister Noster unmasked as an heretical impostor, as did Master Hoogstraten, not least though the last, who into the fire the eyeglass did cast. Finally, a word about the poor soul to whom all these letters were addressed. The humanists didn't choose Pfefferkorn or even Hoogstraten to receive the flood of obscurantist greetings from across Europe. Instead, they picked Ortwin Gracious, a professor in Cologne. Why? Likely because they saw him not only as an active participant in the anti-Reuchlin campaign, but as a kind of traitor. Gracious came from the world of humanism. He taught rhetoric, wrote poetry, and knew his Latin. He should have stood for the light, but instead aligned himself with the dark. The actual authors of the letters had studied in Cologne. They knew Ortwin personally. So when he turned into the 16th century equivalent of a cultural sellout, they didn't hold back. Yes, I said actual authors because although the letters of obscure men were published anonymously in 1515, historians have long since unmasked the minds behind them. Crotus Rubeanus, Ulrich von Hutten, and Hermann von dem Busch. Three brilliant German humanists, well-traveled, multilingual, razor-sharp in wit and in thought. What they created wasn't just a satire of a few theologians, it was a portrait of a dying age written by those who were already sketching the face of the next. Of course, something is always lost in translation, something slips away into the distance of centuries, and yes, the letters of obscure men are full of things we no longer understand and never will. But the essential remains. It still breathes between the lines. It's the air of the Renaissance, the air of rebirth, the air of that extraordinary moment when the dream of human happiness, the hope that light might one day truly conquer darkness, that the golden age lay not in the past but ahead, had not yet begun to sound naive. The air of those towering decades at the turn of the 15th and 16th centuries, when one could still believe in a dream, best captured by one of the letter's authors, Ulrich von Hutten. O century, O knowledge, it is a joy to be alive. Fields of knowledge are flourishing, spirits are stirring. You, barbarism, get a rope and prepare yourself for exile. Just think about it for a moment. All those arrogant forces of darkness, the Hoogstratens, the Pfefferkorns, the von Tongerns, were defeated. In Frankfurt, Worms, Mainz, in every city where Pfefferkorn had managed to carry out his confiscations, the seized books were returned to their rightful owners. The court in Speyer sided with Reuchlin. Hoogstraten's appeal in Rome dragged on for years and ended in a humiliating defeat. By 1520, under irresistible pressure, even his fellow Dominicans would not only officially withdraw from the fight against Reuchlin and promise never to resume it, they would also throw Hoogstraten under the cart. At the peace negotiations, Dominican prior solemnly declared that Reuchlin's erudition and honesty were beyond question, and that the campaign against him had been, imagine that, the personal initiative of Master Hoogstraten, in which the order of preachers had played, well, almost no real part at all. Worse still, the reputation of the University of Cologne took a devastating blow. The obscurantists tried to defend themselves, but the letters of obscure men did their work. By the early 1520s, enrollment had dropped to its lowest point in decades. Reuchlin, meanwhile, was at the height of his fame. He became a symbol of the struggle for intellectual freedom across Europe. Erasmus of Rotterdam called him the glory of our Germany. The printer humanist Daniel Bomberg, dedicating to him an edition of the Hebrew Psalms, wrote, "I would seem ungrateful and uncivilized if I did not do all in my power to make your name immortal." And finally, Cardinal Egidio of Viterbo, general of the Augustinian order and one of Reuchlin's chief defenders in Rome, said it best: "In this trial, we have defended and preserved not Reuchlin, but the law, and not the Talmud, but the Church." It is not that Reuchlin has been saved by us, but that we have been saved by Reuchlin. 500 years have passed since, and you might think that these were merely forgotten Latin quarrels, relics of a long-gone world. But listen closely, and you will hear that this quarrel lives on. Because the argument between Pfefferkorn and Reuchlin was never just about books or theology or the Talmud. It was about fear and knowledge, persecution and freedom. And perhaps the hardest part of all is to recognize that Pfefferkorn is not only a name from history, but a voice that still whispers inside each of us. The censor, the coward, the one who prefers hatred to love. And the real victory of Reuchlin's cause begins only when we learn to defeat that inner Pfefferkorn, the part of ourselves that comes out of the darkness. Because today, just as in this story 500 years ago, our lives are set between Pfefferkorn and Reuchlin. And every time we choose between silence and speech, between fear and curiosity, between exclusion and understanding, we're adding a new line to that old debate, a new argument to one of those names. And in those moments, we would do well to remember the name of Johannes Reuchlin, because his name, in my view, is a great symbol. A symbol of what it means to stand tall when the world demands your obedience. A symbol of what it means to defend the truth, even when it is dangerous. A symbol of courage it takes to say, "I will not be part of the darkness." Reuchlin's name carries the weight of all those who kept the flame of learning alive through the long centuries. It speaks for every fragile bridge built between cultures, every whisper of hope carried through storms of hatred. It reminds us that even the most fragile voice, if it speaks for justice, is worth listening to. It reminds us that the human spirit, doubting, trembling, sometimes terribly alone, can still choose light. And in choosing it, become immortal. Thank you for being with us today on this journey through ink and fire. May the voices we've heard and those we've remembered stay with you as you walk back into your world. And may you carry a little of Reuchlin's light with you. And for now, call me Armin, and I'll see you next time.